Thank you for tuning in to the F5 Recovery Podcast. We're super happy that you're here. We have a very special guest with us. But first, we want to thank our sponsors, the F5 Project, the Ridge Treatment and Reentry Center, and of course, our brand new sponsor, GoAwayBear.com.
GoAwayBear.com.
An amazing sponsor and continue to support this podcast. If you would like to support our podcast, please hit the subscribe button on the bottom and let us know that you just enjoy this podcast. And if you want to sponsor, we're always looking for new sponsors as well. We are a nonprofit doing amazing things in the Fargo-Moorhead area, so we want to continue to do this work. But introducing our special guest, Della-Rae Hammergren. Della, welcome.
That's how you say your last name?
Hammergren, yeah.
Hammergren.
Yeah.
Close, yeah.
What?
Like Hammergren.
Oh,
Mm-hmm. Is that German?
I guess I've never tried to pronounce it.
Is that my real name?
No, is it German? Like, what is your heritage?
Norwegian.
Norwegian.
Hammer.
Yeah, that's what it felt like. It was like,
They used to call me Deli Ham in high school.
No, they didn't.
Yes.
You just made that shit up right
No,
now.
I swear to God, they used to.
Deli Ham.
no, if you've known Della
Oh my
since high
God.
school,
Why did you tell everyone?
you have to let us know if this is true. Oh my God. Really?
Yes. I don't remember who came up with it, but I've had quite a few nicknames, that's for sure.
Deli Ham.
Deli Ham.
I'm never going to forget that.
No, I'm changing my name on your phone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the name has been changed in the contacts. Deli.
Well, thank you, Della. So for those who don't know, tell more people about who you are and kind of your involvement and connection with us.
Okay.
All that other good stuff.
How much time do we got?
Like, take as long as you need, girl.
Yeah, so where do I start? I really introduce myself as like, my name's Della and I'm an addict. And why I do that is a reminder of kind of where I was and where I'm at and where I'm trying to go. So I'm in recovery. I've been clean for 6 years.
Nice.
Congrats. That's
Thank
great.
you.
Yeah.
But my story of like drugs and chaos and partying started a long time ago, and I was pretty young when I started getting into, I don't know, the chaos, I could say.
Mm-hmm.
I started using drugs at a very young age, but before that I already had like characteristics of an addict, and so like, in my own personal opinion, I feel like I was born with that DNA and like that was just kind of my destiny. And so when I was young, I had imaginary friends. I was very isolated from other people. I just didn't feel like I fit in places. I went through like an emo phase, and I can just see your eyebrows. But I just feel like that those behaviors and those characteristics were running deep in my life long before drugs came to play. Okay. So when drugs came into the picture, another thing that I was very chaotic about was boys as well, right? And so my behavior with boys, my behavior with drugs, and then mixing those together was just a recipe for disaster. Yep. So I could go on and on about my using, right? And that's really not my story anymore. Mm-hmm. My story now is like me in recovery, right? And me learning how to live a different life. And it's such a blessing to be a part of F5 because I'm a felon and not the best background. When I first got into recovery, I had shitty credit, Mm-hmm. And I had heard about F5 Project and I was like, that's so cool. Like, those are my people. I want to be a part of that, And today, I've been working with F5 for the past 4 years, and it's been nothing short of a blessing,
4 years, okay.
Yeah. So, I don't know how deep you wanted me to get into who I am and where I'm coming from, but yeah, that's kind of like scratching the
So what was the moment when the recovery happened? Like, when it really happened?
I lost the desire to use when I was still using. Mm-hmm. There was a point where, let's say I had all the drugs that I wanted, right? And I felt like if I get to that place, I'm going to be fine. I'll never have to worry about coming down. I'll never have to worry about looking for more. And I got to a position like that in my active addiction, and I had never felt more alone. And I remember sitting outside of my boyfriend at the time, his mom's house, like bawling because I wanted to stop using, but I didn't know how, you know? And I tried different things like moving. I moved to Bismarck with my sister to like, I thought as long as I stop using drugs, I'm going to be fine.
Right.
And I was totally wrong about that. I went right back to the same shit. And so honestly, what really was the driving factor was probation told me either it's prison or treatment. And so I went to treatment in Fargo because I'm originally from Grand Forks. And this whole time I'm like, yeah, I want to stop using. And then I get there and I have to be clean and I start panicking, you know, like this is what I've wanted for so long. But now my best friend, my drug of choice is no longer an option, you know? And so there was a lot of back and forth in my head of like what I wanted, what am I supposed to be doing? You know, for a long time, I thought I was supposed to die using. I honestly convinced myself that I was supposed to be a bad example of like what you tell your kids not to do, you know? And so my defining factor was I was clean for a couple months, got a little bit of freedom from the treatment center, and I went right back to the same shit. Same hotel. Yeah, weird. You know, I was in the same hotels with the same people with the same drugs and nothing had changed. And I remember like getting high and it was sitting right in front of me, but I felt like I just could not get enough. Like I just needed more and more and more. And I came to this realization. I was like, dude, I don't want this anymore. Like this is not what I want. And so like that was a big deciding factor. Like I needed that relapse. It was therapeutic, painful, but it was super therapeutic. And it wasn't the relapse that was the worst. It was like the shame and guilt that came along with that, you know? So
what happened? Like after all that, like the relapse happened, you went in the hotel and when was the first day?
I had reached out to an individual that I had met in recovery and I said, I don't know what to do. I'm scared and I don't know where to turn.
Why did you reach out to that person?
Because I had met them in a 12-step meeting. Okay. Yeah. And I just felt like this was the person I didn't even know them that well. Yeah. Right? But there was a couple people reaching out to me who kind of knew what was going on. But I reached out to this girl, which is bizarre because I've always relied on men for things, right? And I reached out to this girl. I said, I don't know what to do. And she said, come to my house and you can sleep on my couch for a little bit. And I laid on that couch feeling super suicidal after the drugs had worn off. And she was like, you know, bringing me out to do stuff, running errands. And I was just like so miserable, you know? But when I look back at that time, she was just trying to be there for me and get me out of the house and get me out of my head, you know? She wasn't forcing anything down my throat. She wasn't like, you need to do this, this, and this. She just gave me a safe space to like come down and like get my bearings, you know? And forever, like for that, I will forever be grateful, you know?
Well, how long did you stay with her?
3 days. Okay. Until I could piss clean and go back to treatment.
So just gotta have that clean.
Pretty normal, actually. You know, that's cool because I think all of us that are in recovery have that person, like like my person I called from that payphone. And I mean, one, because I remembered his number, I didn't have any, you know, and then two, I just knew he wouldn't be an ass. Like, you know, some people after they've been sober for a while kind of go that authoritarian route where they just know everything. And it's just like, you know, well, you should have called me. I'm like, no shit, man. Yeah. Like I should have a long time ago, but I just didn't, you know. And the person I called, he was just laid back, let me sleep on his couch for like a couple of weeks. Yeah. And then there's something to say for, you know, we used to call it when in the group that I was from, couch commitments.
Really?
Yeah, we had a whole, like, we had this apartment complex where of the 8 apartments, there was 3 drunks, or recovering alcoholics, living in each one. And so it was like, it's very like similar to like F5 with our apartment complexes in North Fargo. So but you'd stay on one couch for three days, 3 days, 3 days, 3 days. And then by the time, the goal was by the time you got through all the apartments, you were pretty well connected.
It's so crazy because that house that I went to was like the recovery trap house.
Yeah.
Like there was like 3 people, including myself, sleeping on the couch in the living room, but everyone was in recovery.
Yeah.
Everyone was clean.
Yeah.
You know?
Like we called it a sober frat house.
Yeah.
So recovery trap, sober frat. Huh. It's so weird how the 12-step organizations are so similar to each other, but like they think they're unique.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Anyway. So what do you do now?
Be more specific.
Professionally, personally.
So I'm obviously still with F5. Professionally, I was just promoted to regional director of Fargo and Jamestown.
Wow. There it is.
And that's a story in itself.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like personally, I've come a long way. I've had to work on a lot of things personally, on my attitude. I like to be spicy, you know, and say how I feel.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's important, right? But I think there's also like a time and place for everything. And so I've learned if I want to like get places and go places, I have to work on some things personally, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I've just always had a hustle and a drive to want to do more and be more. And so I had to really rely on my support system to guide me in the right direction. You know, like if this is my goal, I can't just jump through all these steps and get there.
Mm-hmm.
Like I have to work on some stuff, and it's going to be difficult, and it's still a learning it's still a learning curve for me, you know. I was management at KFC when I got into treatment. I was working at KFC. I was staff, and then I became shift supervisor and then assistant general manager. And when I look back at that time, I was a rugged manager, you know, like just how I approached people, how I was trying to dictate. I learned a lot from that, that's for sure. But, you know, personally, my recovery is based out of, you know, a 12-step group, and that's a big piece of who I am, you know, and how I recognize myself. And you know, like I travel around the United States going to like conventions and meeting other addicts and sharing my experience and them sharing theirs with mine, you know, and that's where I get my juice, you know, like that's where I get fired up and I'm like ready to get back to work, or I'm ready to be of service to other people, or I'm ready to do some internal work on myself, you know, because one thing I've noticed since being clean, the longer I stay clean, I feel like the more problems I have. Sounds crazy, right?
Yep.
But when I first was getting clean, I was really working on like getting a job and getting an apartment, getting my license back, getting a vehicle, you know. But now I realize I have a lot of internal stuff to work on, you know. So
like what? I'm just kidding. You don't, you don't have to answer that.
Yeah.
So do you see that there's a correlation between personal development and professional development?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I went to this women's prison down in Arizona, and it's their whole track is personal and professional development. And these ladies had been in this development program for like 12 months. And I was it was like hanging out with when I used to work at High Point. And there was the women that worked there that had like been through school and been through a couple corporate jobs, and just the level of confidence they had and what they were talking about, like tech and the lingo that comes with the corporate culture and stuff like that. I felt like I was sitting in the lobby of High Point. Like it was so amazing how much professional development is dependent on your personal development. You know, because you're right. There's times where, I mean, even you know, I was recently promoted to the CEO, you know, position, but I'm joking. And I'll sit there and I have opinions. Like even in, you know, the care coordination meetings that I used to sit in, or the marketing meetings or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times it's just like, that's why I always say, is this helpful and is it factual?
Mm-hmm.
Like those two, if you repeat that to yourself on any time, you like at the beginning of every day or like the beginning of a conversation, and you actually apply it, man, just on that alone, my conversations and relationships have gotten better because I'm not gossiping. I'm not trying to be spicy, right? You know, I'm not trying to be controversial. I'm just, you know, being helpful and being factual, and people find trust in that. And if they can trust you, they'll do anything with you,
right?
You know? And so, but that's not built in professional necessarily. That's a personal, I can't make you trust me.
Right.
You know what I mean? I have to prove it. And the more, it's like the one thing out of all the what would you call it? Like the skills building. It's the one thing that is probably more important than anything is trust. You know, because if you trust them when you do, you know, if I trust someone and they come to me and give me their opinion or whatever, I'm more likely to listen to it. I'm more likely to maybe not believe them necessarily, but like intently listen to their, and if I don't trust them, they could be like, have the best effort in the world. They could have the best attitude in the world, but if I don't trust them, I'm not going to believe them, and the other two mean nothing.
Right.
And then you're just almost a manipulator. You know what I mean? So, but that's all done through personal development, and I think you're spot on.
Yeah.
With how much you've grown, even though you were like been a couple of years sober before you even started at F5, you've grown a lot in the last 4 years. So there's a reason that you're the director of Argo and Jamestown, because we trust you.
Scary, huh?
Yeah, weird.
So Della, you were talking a lot about like obviously some personal development and things. So what does your personal development look like now when you're around people who aren't developing or aren't like making progress, or maybe are still using, or like what does that look like for you now?
That's a deep question.
Wow.
Yeah. So each situation is different, right? And so I will say I'm at a place in my life that if somebody's using and needs a place to go, I'm probably not going to offer up my couch. That's just where I'm at personally, you know? And why I say that is because I've put a lot of effort in creating a safe space for myself, because I hadn't had one for so long, you know? So the thought of bringing somebody else into that, it doesn't sit right with me. But as far as individuals that like, I might feel like they're not working on themselves or struggling in certain areas, honestly, I like to give them grace, but I also ask them like some open-ended questions, you know, to get them thinking. Because I'm not going to tell them, hey, you need to do this, this, and this, because I know what that's like when somebody tells me that. I'm going to do everything else the opposite way. And so I just try to lead by example, you know, and who am I to say if they're growing or not? You know, there's a lot of things behind the doors that I don't see. But, you know, especially like my close circle, they're not new to me calling them on their shit. You know, like my close people, I'm probably going to be very blunt, but it comes from like a loving place, right? If it's somebody I'm not very close to, I'll just kind of tippy-toe, you know, around the issue, but I'm not going to like co-sign somebody's bullshit either. So.
Yeah. And people evolve too. So it's, you know, even where Della's at, where that's, I mean, 5 years, you may not be that way. Right, you may just be more, you may end up letting people sleep on your couch and be more caring in that sense, you know, like it's different. And that recovery worldview, like how you view recovery it's always changing. Because back in the day, man, we were militant. We were just like if you're not doing couch commitments, like if you're not accepting them, you're not in recovery. Like we would say bullshit like that. And we wear like suits to meetings and stuff. And we were just an army of like recovery. And then now, man, like I just feel like we wasted so many opportunities to be helpful. And a lot of the guys who are still around have evolved into, more of a graceful, helpful approach. So it'll change.
Yeah. There's people in the office who share about, there's someone specifically, and I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. She'll be driving around, and if she needs to, she'll take her shoes off her feet and get somebody walking, know. And I had told her recently, I said, when you shared that made me want to be a better person, That makes me want to start putting more stuff in my car so I can just hand them out as needed, know. And so it doesn't matter how long I've been clean, not sober. I can learn from somebody who's been in recovery or, stopped using drugs for 24 hours, right? Or I can learn from somebody who's been clean or sober for 19 years, you know?
This old timer's hair is like raising up on the back of their neck. What are you going to learn from someone 24 hours?
So we want to thank so much Della for being on our show today. And we, of course, want to thank our sponsors, the F5 Project, the Ridge Treatment and Reentry Center, as well as GoAwayBear.com.
GoAwayBear.com.
Every time. Want to thank them so much.
It's a killer website.
It's actually, it's really dope. And it's kind of like a cool story. Even they were like, yeah.
It's cool because it's not a typical sponsor or whatever, but he's such a big fan of the work that we're doing that he wanted to sponsor this.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So he's also sponsored the Hustle Up meeting on Monday nights.
Oh, great.
That we do.
Yeah.
Yeah, he made a lot of that available for us. So good dude.
Yeah. That's awesome, the impact that we're able to have on this show.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, speaking of impact, Ella, looking at obviously your progress that you've made so far, and are you currently sponsoring anyone? Have you gotten to that place where you're sponsoring anyone? You don't tell us the names, of course.
Is this supposed to be an advertisement so that everyone's like, oh, Della's sponsoring? Scary commitment. Yeah, I've throughout my recovery have had, I think I was maybe 3 months clean, and I was at this meeting that was basically newcomers, and this woman asked me, she's like, will you be my sponsor? And I'm like, what? And somebody had told me they said, just say yeah. And I said and I was like, what am I going to do? I'm so nervous. I don't even know how to guide them. And then I'm getting pumped up, and I'm like, yeah, I'm just waiting for her to call me. She never called. You know what I mean? But yeah, throughout the years I've sponsored women, and it's super cool. Just to hear going through questions and asking what their thoughts and feelings are on things. It just really blows my mind, and I think back to when my first sponsor was walking me through some stuff, and I was fighting it tooth and nail, and so it's such a blessing to meet some women who are like, no, I'm ready for this, and I can just relate to them so much.
Yeah.
So
it's amazing that both you and Adam have sponsored people so early in your recovery.
2 weeks.
Yeah, I think you said 3 months.
Yeah.
Adam,
Mine was by accident. It wasn't. I thought I was supposed to.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that.
Yeah, no.
But if you can be a connection or a support to somebody else who looks up to you like that, why not? You know?
And have a person in even if I was 2 weeks sober, having someone in your phone that's sober, you know what I mean, and being able to text them and stuff. I might, you're probably not going to get the most wisdom from someone who's 2 weeks sober, but you'll get a lot of those guys that I sponsored early on, they're still sober today. So it was they switched sponsors. They got to a point where it was just man, he's kind of a mess too. But they'll always, anytime they get a birthday or whatever, they'll always give props to the guy that reached out, And so it's really just,
that's cool.
It's not really even sponsorship as much as it's two people connecting and having an ongoing meeting.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
We always say yes.
Yeah.
We used to have mugs that said, just get in the car. Because it was, we're going to a meeting, get in the car, and it was, man, when I was, what was that? Probably in and out for 10 years. And then I got sober 10 years ago. So that 10 years that I was crazy getting sober, not being sober, getting sober, I always came back. And it was always because it was the fellas that were they were just like super welcoming, and they never brought it. They weren't confused that I relapsed. They were just like, well, you know where we meet. We'll see you there.
Right.
And it was awesome. And so I try to do the same thing. I'm kind of in the same boat as Della, where it's just like, you know, the things that my 12-step program gave me are the same things that are taking me away from it. You know, I got sober, then I had kids, and I got a big job, and I got, you know, bills, and and all this gifts of sobriety are the exact same things that have been pulling me from it. So I've kind of went through this phase where I'm back to the basics.
Yeah.
Like when all else fails, work with another alcoholic. And that's like been my saving grace, is when I get in my head and I can't make it to a meeting, I'm calling someone, I'm texting someone, someone who I I don't necessarily work with. Maybe I met them at a meeting, whatever, right? And just try to find ways to be helpful without any profit motive,
Right.
you know, like true spiritual act, not expecting anything in return. And I usually like to work with the guys that literally have nothing.
Yeah.
You know, because then it's just like they're just hungry, and you get to watch that journey. You know, happiness to me is like when I got my kids, and I got a good job, and I got, you know, found some success. Joy is watching someone else do it, and I just get so much enjoyment watching the guys that I sponsor level up in their lives. That's why I say yes.
Yeah.
Always.
That's cool. Yeah. So Della, we've had like a lot of conversations about family and just the kind of not only just the importance of family, but just like how great families can be, but how much you want to just sometimes. So like, what is that like when for you now, like obviously as you're navigating, you know, your new life in recovery with your family, do you ever like get any sort of do they ever bring up your past? Do they ever kind of like, you know, are not trusting that this is a new, different Della, like you're a new person, even 6 years later? Do you still have those kind of conversations now?
Family's a sensitive subject. You know, my grandma's like my number one supporter.
I love your grandma.
Yeah.
Your grandma is amazing.
Yeah.
She makes bomb cookies too.
Yeah, she's such a little sweetie, and I'll be like, yeah, I'm going to a meeting, or she'll always ask me like, you know, you're doing too much. Are you still like going to your meetings and things? So she's very supportive. Yeah. You know, I've never really had my family second guess what I've been doing, or if they haven't been verbal to me about it. You know. How deep are we going into this subject?
Wherever you want.
Yeah, wherever you like, whatever you
feel comfortable with.
Right.
Okay. So a big part of my story is my mom. Me and her used to use together. I went to foster care. I've always had this desire to have my mom in my life, right? And so when we started using drugs together, I thought that was us bonding, you know? And it ended up like tearing us apart. You know, I had always told myself like, I'm never going to be like my mom and do this drug. Well, lo and behold, I was doing that drug with her, you know? Or I was incarcerated one time and she was my cellmate, you know? And so when I got into recovery, I remember going to meetings and like bawling my eyes out because the one person I wanted there was my mom, you know? And so I would, if you could imagine like kicking and dragging somebody, screaming and fighting, that's how I felt with my mom when I was in recovery, right? Like, if I bring you to this door, you just have to turn the knob and there's going to be freedom on the other side, you know? And she would get to those places where she was at the door, like knocking, but not ready to get in, right? And that's just like a metaphor, I guess you could call it, but... all throughout my recovery, I just wanted my mom to be a part of it. And so when she passed away 2 years ago, that was probably one of the wildest things I had to go through in recovery, you know. And it's a blessing because, you know, I think one of my reservations always was if one of my loved ones passed away, I'd probably pick up and get high. And... that wasn't even a thought when she passed, you know? Like, that is the beauty of recovery and working on myself, that, like, that is no longer a solution for me, right? And so, family is a lot different to me now than it was like 2-3 years ago, you know? I think I kind of took it for granted in a sense. And so now my mission is to like be the best sister and the best auntie and the best grandchild, because at the end of the day, these are the people I love, and I've not been a part of their lives for so long through my active addiction. Like, I want to be there for them now, right? And so I think my actions and me honestly showing up to these events, like going to my niece's state cheer, or showing up to my nephew's birthday party, or calling my grandma on Sunday, like, those actions are showing that I'm still in recovery. Because for a long time, nobody heard from me, you know? So I think that's why they don't really question where I'm at or what I'm doing. So...
Yeah. That's cool. I love hearing that. And thank you for sharing. I know, obviously, you had
that was deep.
No idea of any of these questions I was going to ask you, which was on purpose because I wanted you to be as authentic. But sharing about that,
he knew what he was doing.
Yeah,
he was acting like, oh, you just feel comfortable.
But I think, and the reason, like, that transition as we're closing, it's cool that now we get to honor your mom in a really significant way with our women's housing. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I just want to give a shout out to Adam specifically, because when we were at the funeral home, we were picking everything bare minimum, because it's me, my brother, and my sister having to pay for this financially, right? My mom doesn't have any assets. She doesn't have any money. And so when we seen the grand total, it was like $7,000, and I just, like, my stomach hit the floor, you know? Like, how are we going to pay for this? I've never taken a loan from the bank, so, like, how do I do that? You know, just panicking in such a traumatic time in my life, you know? And I'd reached out to Adam, and the subject came up about starting a GoFundMe. And he started that, and because of the community's donations, I was able to give my mom a funeral, you know, and I didn't have to worry about, you know, like, some of the major things. I was able to be in the moment, and like, I think 5 to 7 people from F5 showed up at the funeral. Like, those things, like, they might be small, like Adam's just putting something on social media, or, you know, they're just driving an hour to, like, you and Adam both showed up, you know, like, that plays such a big role in my drive to want to be better and do more, right? Because these people are showing up for me in a hard time, and so I want to do the same for others. And so, anyways, so the biggest thing I've always wanted is, like, women's housing, right? Because we've housed men for a long time, and a big driving factor was, like, if my mom would have had a safe place to go, would her life turned out different, you know? And so there was a couple other deciding factors, and what, like, a big drive of it was, you know, I wanted, like, affordable housing for women in the FM area. And so the idea popped off last year, and it came to fruition the end of December of last year, and there's been so many hands in the picture of making this possible. And so Christy is, what is her title?
Director of housing, statewide housing.
Yeah. And so she said,
it's a big deal.
Yeah.
We'll just say that.
Yeah. And so she, you know, she's like, Della, I'd love to name the women's unit after your mom. And so now the women's unit is named Tam's Sanctuary. And it's so crazy because when my mom was in the grips of it, she just wanted her own place. Like, she would make a she shed out of, like, a small little room in, like, this tiny apartment, and she would just hang up pictures of her grandkids, and it was just, like, doodles everywhere, and it was like a hot mess, right? But it was her spot. And so now we get to honor her in that way of, like, offering women a safe place to go, you know, get back on their feet and be supported along the way. So, yeah. It's really beautiful.
That's amazing. Well, shout out Christy Johnson. Shout out Adam. Appreciate you. Yeah. And Tam Sanctuary. That's amazing. Yeah. Well, good. Well, as we close the show, do you have anything you all would like to share that we haven't covered already?
No, I'm really grateful you're on the show today. It was a lot of reminiscing both professionally and personally. So it was. This was good.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you all again so much for watching and listening, and please subscribe and please continue to support this channel. We were going to continue to give you great episodes here on F5 Recovery Podcast, and have a great day in recovery.
That's how the cookie crumbles.